Welcome back to Ellie 2.0 Radio. This is Ellie Krug, your esteemed host. I am thrilled to be talking to you once again, about idealism and idealists, humans who are working to make the world better. As usual, we have a great show. The big interview is with Sierra Grande, a speaker on neurodiversity and disability. You will love hearing from Sierra. And she will help educate not only me, but you on these very important topics. And of course, in the C block, and I don't know how much time I'm going to have for it, but in the C block, I'm going to talk about my work as an idealist, something that happened on Thursday this week in a small southeastern Minnesota town, okay? But as always, as we always do, here in the A block, let's start off with this week's featured idealist. And I'm sure that most of you have heard of the outdoor clothing company Patagonia. It's got a wonderfully colorful label. They have wonderfully great stuff. I have this pair of shorts that just continued to exist and last. Now we're on summer number 3 with these shorts, and they're not showing no sign of wearing. And Patagonia, other than selling clothes, okay, as it turns out, is much more in the world, and much more the product of one man who's an idealist. Now, while I was familiar with the products of Patagonia, I certainly did not understand the story behind the company, and did not understand that the company's founder, a man named Yvon Chouinard, I'm just going to call him Yvon, okay, is an idealist of the highest degree. Who is Yvon Chouinard? Well, presently, he is 85 years old. He was born in Lewiston, Maine in 1938. His last name, Chouinard, is, of course, French, and it's owing to his French-Canadian father. In 1947, the family moved from Maine to California, where Yvon was when he was 9 years old. And once in California, and he still lives in California, from there, he became very, very familiar with the outdoors, and he became quite the outdoor enthusiast, as well as an inventor. So before he was 30 years old, he had been climbing mountains in Canada, and then engineering new methods of climbing rock walls in Yosemite National Park, and in the park, taking new routes, going up the faces of cliffs that never had been traversed before because they were deemed too difficult. He also, along the way, bought a second-hand coal-fired forge and began making steel pitons. These are the things that you see climbers hammering into the crevasses and cracks in the face of cliffs so that they have a place to hold on to and secure themselves from. He started making those his own, okay, and then selling them out of the trunk of his car, because this guy really was tied to nature and ultimately tied to the earth, okay? Now, in 1970, Yvon visited Scotland, where he bought some rugby shirts and then resold them in the U.S. Now, this is the migration from him from doing mountaineering to doing clothing, doing a clothing line, clothing store. And that was those shirts brought back from Scotland, those rugby shirts, that was the start of Patagonia, which ultimately would become a multi-million-dollar company. I think last year its sales were over $300 million. And ultimately all of those sales, with that company beginning in approximately 1973, all of those sales would make Yvon a multi-billionaire. Okay? All right. But unlike most billionaires, Yvon had a social conscience. Thus, in 1984, way before there was any kind of trend of any type, Patagonia's California headquarters opened an on-site cafeteria that served mainly healthy vegetarian food. And at the same location, the headquarters, they opened an on-site child care facility. This is 1984. I mean, this must have been one of the first companies, national companies, to have a child care facility at its headquarters. Later, the company established a program where employees could intern while still be fully paid, full benefits. They could intern for 2 months at an environmental nonprofit of their choice. Okay? The company then became an advocate for the removal of dams that impacted fish migration. Now, all of this is because of Ivan. All of this is because he was tied to the earth. He was an environmentalist. He believed in needing to secure the earth. And so Patagonia advocated against damming rivers, okay, particularly on the lower Snake River. The company even funded a 2014 documentary titled Dam Nation. Also, in 2017, at the height of the Trump administration, Patagonia and Ivan sued the Trump administration when it dramatically reduced the size of the Bears Ears and Grand Staircase Escalante national monuments in Utah. You may remember that. Trump just unilaterally, because, his buddies in the oil business, said, and the timber business said, hey, you got too much land out here we can't get a hold of. And so he just halved that national park, okay? And here's a clip of Ivan talking about that litigation, talking about trying to protect the environment.
I can be a pretty cynical guy. The one thing that really keeps me going are these wild places that are the real soul of this country. A great part of my life, I've been climbing and fishing and hunting on public lands. I've been a successful businessman because of the lessons I learned in the outdoors. My business was built on having wild places. Public lands have never been more threatened than right now, because you have a few self-serving politicians who want to sell them off and make money. Behind the politicians are the energy companies and the big corporations that want to use up those natural resources. It's just greed. This belongs to us. This belongs to all of the people in America. It's our heritage. I hope my kids and grandkids will have the same experiences that I had. Our Secretary of the Interior, Zinke, has said he believes in public lands. Let's hold him to it. Let's not let him back down on that.
That was the voice of an idealist, if you ever heard one, okay? Now, on top of all of that, beginning in 1985, Patagonia dedicated 1% of its sales toward preservation and restoration of the natural environment. 17 years later, Ivan co-founded a nonprofit corporation named 1% of the Planet, which in turn, again, helping to give 1%, which in turn attracted 5,000 other businesses that pledged 1% of their revenue towards helping to protect the environment. I mean, my God, think about just that impact. But that wasn't enough for Ivan. It wasn't, not our idealist. Two other things. One is, Ivan understands the role of peaceful civil disobedience in our country. He understands that. And believe it or not, Patagonia, it has this policy. It does. It has this policy of training its team members on how to engage in peaceful civil disobedience. I mean, could you imagine Microsoft doing that, or Amazon doing that, No, okay? But on top of that, Patagonia will pay the bail of any team member who's arrested while peacefully engaged in civil disobedience. And that includes not only for the environment, but also for reproductive rights. Yeah. I mean, now understand that Patagonia is privately held, okay? And that brings me to the last big thing about Patagonia. And that is that in 2022, 2 years ago, when Ivan had a net worth of $1.2 billion, and Patagonia was worth $3 billion capital market valuation, Ivan forfeited. He gave up his ownership in the company and transferred all of the voting stock to a trust that was created to protect the company's values and to prevent it from being sold. So Ivan is like, I'm not going to sell this to anyone, And I'm going to create a trust so Patagonia continues to live on into the future, being operated by trustees. Okay? He then also created another nonprofit. And then 100% of the company's non-voting stock went into that company. That future Patagonia profits will go into this company. It's called, hold on, Ellie, did we get the name of it? And we did not write down what the name of that company is, okay? But it's a nonprofit, and that company is getting money from Patagonia. It's getting the profits from Patagonia, okay, the money that Patagonia would make, otherwise the money that would go into the pocket of Yvon and his family, and it's going into this company, and that company is intended to go and fight climate change and protect the environment. Think about that. A billionaire who gave up his wealth to protect planet Earth. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how more idealistic you can get than that. And what blows me away is I have been doing this show about idealists for, I don't know, we're heading towards year 8. And you know what? I never, ever heard the name Yvon Chouinard. I never, ever heard the story about Patagonia until just a couple of days ago. That just goes to show you there are a whole lot of idealists out there, a whole lot of people out there working to make the world better. We just don't know about them. And they're not trying to be, fancy. They're not trying to get notoriety. They're just doing the work, trying to make the world better. You got to love that. You really do. Okay. All right. Well, that's all we've got for our featured idealist this week. When we come back from our break, we're going to talk to Sierra Grande. You're going to love hearing from her about neurodiversity and disability. You're listening to me, Ellie Krug, one of the relatively few transgender radio hosts in the world, but the only one in the world who's transgender and an idealist and who has a radio show about it. I know that for a fact. When we come back, we'll do the big interview. You're listening to me, Ellie Krug. And we're back, Ellie 2.0 Radio. All right, so listen, in your free time, go check out Yvon Chouinard, okay, from Patagonia. Quite the idealist, quite the story. And now, for the big interview, we have another idealist with another big story. I want to welcome Sierra Grande to Ellie 2.0 Radio. Sierra, welcome to the show. I'm thrilled to be able to talk to you.
Thank you so much for having me, Ellie. I am very excited to be here.
Now, Sierra, you are, among other things, you graduated from law school. You're waiting to get the law school bar results back. You're also, though, becoming a national speaker on neurodiversity and job access and disability, as well as you have this other thing going on about Questify Your Life, which I'm going to have you talk about in a second. But I will tell you, I've done nearly 350 episodes of this show. We have had people from across maybe the world as interviewees, but we have never, ever talked about neurodiversity. Okay? And so
I'm honored.
That's why I'm thrilled to have you here. So let's start with the basics. Can you define what neurodiversity is, and define how that relates to disability, okay? And then also let's get into that topic about ableism, okay? Because that's something I think that has to be part of the background conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you. I mean, it's an honor to be able to share this with your audience. So neurodiversity is an umbrella term that captures all human minds. Neurodiversity is equivalent to biodiversity, the difference in how the world connects to each other. So with neurodiversity, different brains are okay. It's expected. It's normal to have a variation. And then within the neurodiversity movement, there are terms neurotypical and neurodivergent. Another way to think of this is the neurominority, neurodivergent, and the neuromajority, which is neurotypical. And it depends on how you want to define that. It could either be broad or narrow. So broadly speaking, neurodivergent would include any significant variation in the brain that causes harm, symptoms, like differences that make it harder to go into life. Okay. So ADHD, autism, any of the neurodevelopmental disorders would be the narrow definition. And then broader, you would include like traumatic brain injuries, schizophrenia, bipolar, differences in the brain that make it harder. However, when we're talking about those labels such as ADHD or autism, which I live with both of those labels end up being in the medical model of disability. Okay. And so the medical model aims to cure, it aims to treat, it aims to pathologize. It puts you in a little box and it gives you a map being like, this is what you have, this is how we will treat it, and not much more. It focuses very much on the individual experience. Neurodiversity, the movement, came from the social model of disability, meaning that socially, the structures and systems that we as a society have created cause disabling features within neurodivergent individuals. I don't fully believe in the pure definition of a social model of disability because I think that even without certain structural limitations, there's still symptoms that I would experience whether or not, like whenever. Sometimes noises are too loud. That's not because of how society is created. That's a symptom I'm experiencing and it hurts. Okay. So I like a middle ground, and there's people who I agree with who also advocate, and the middle ground would be more of a biopsychosocial model of disability, kind of a middle ground. So you're looking at the biology, the psychology, and the social aspects of disability. Okay. I have like a little note about some of the percentages, because 1 in 5-ish people, depending on how broad or narrow you're defining neurodivergent, 1 in 5 is approximately how many people are neurodivergent, 15 to 20%. Many neurodivergent people don't identify that way, in large part because this is a newer social movement. Neurodiversity and neurodivergent is not a medical term. And then I would also like to just get on a little soapbox about the term neurodiverse for a moment, because it ends up being used incorrectly, in my opinion, often. And the reason we talk about neurodiversity is we're aiming for a more neurodiverse world. We want people who are neurodivergent with different brains to be included and create inclusive spaces. But sometimes people use neurodiverse and neurodivergent interchangeably, and I don't vibe with that, just because of the difference of what the point of the movement is. We want a neurodiverse group of people. We don't want just neurodivergent people or just neurotypical people. Okay.
All right. So thank you for that. That's really a lot. Okay. But I appreciate that. Don't worry. I appreciate the definition. Just tell us, what is ableism? Because we need to contrast that a little bit with what you just talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. Ableism is... Do I have a good definition? Ableism is the dislike of disabled people. Like, it is treating disabled people poorly, whether that is implicitly or explicitly. Similar to sexism, racism, it's one of the isms. It's something that's not talked about a lot, but there are microaggressions, similar to if you're being racist, but not really recognizing that you were conditioned that way. So there's this aspect of being disabled where if people can tell that you are disabled, they will treat you differently. They will treat you like you are less capable or less just able to do things. And so we want to presume competence. And we also want to believe people when they say that they are disabled. Those are two main things when it comes to disability movements.
Okay. All right. And we want people to have the same expectations for somebody who's neurodiverse compared to somebody who is more, I'm looking for the right
neurotypical,
phrase.
Yeah, we want the same expectations for everyone across the board, for all brains. We want to recognize that there are strengths and weaknesses for anyone individually, because a neurodivergent person when you know one neurodivergent person, you just know one, because it's just so vast, and the ways that brains work are so incredibly different. And I would so when I do neurodiversity trainings, because I often do them, I start with an icebreaker, because a lot of people have told me that they want icebreakers at the start of these things. And I have mixed feelings about icebreakers. So I developed one that I think is really powerful. And I would like to try it out with you quickly, because I think it'll kind of make this sink in. When you imagine a sloth in a sundress, what picture comes up in your mind's eye? Like what happens in your brain when you picture a sloth in a sundress?
Some animal hanging off of the side of a tree wearing a red sundress with flowers.
Do you see it? Is it a real sloth or is it a cartoon?
No, I'm seeing a real sloth in my head.
So when I do that, I don't see a picture. I just see vibes and and it's not even vibes. It's depth and understanding, but I don't get a photorealistic anything.
Oh, okay.
And that's there's a term called aphantasia, if I'm not mispronouncing that, because I only typically read it. But the point here is that our brains are so very different just on that one very, very simple prompt. And so when it comes to conflict, when it comes to preferences on how to be treated and communicated, things can vary widely. But we also have a bias to believe that everyone sees the world the same way we do. And so I just wanted to highlight that.
No, I think it's great. I think it's a great example. So, Sierra, tell us a little bit about you. How did you get into the business? That's maybe the right phrase, or the profession or the avocation of speaking, around about the topic of neurodiversity and disability. Give us a little bit of your story, if you could.
Thank you. I started in the mental health advocacy realm because as I was growing up, I was in and out of a lot of mental health hospitals. My first hospitalization was when I was 11. By 14, I was going to a residential treatment center. By 18, while I was still in high school, I underwent electroconvulsive therapy, which is modern day shock therapy, where they were doing seizures or inducing seizures in my brain to help combat some life-threatening depression. And with that trajectory, I also lost a year of my memory because of seizures in your brain hitting your memory spot. So I've been disabled in various forms my entire life. I didn't know that it was ADHD and autism until later, but I had various diagnoses. And I also have chronic pain conditions and other physical health conditions that I also live with. So I'm disabled. But I got really lucky in my treatment plan around 2019, where I was able to get enough of a kind of a boost to start building my life in a way that really resonated with me. And I got into mental health recovery. And then from there, I started facilitating support groups through NAMI. And
hold on, what is NAMI?
NAMI?
What's
NAMI? Is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. It's the largest grassroots nonprofit organization for mental health.
Okay.
And so I do a lot of work with them. I am on a peer leadership council, and it was the first time really feeling like recovery is possible, and we can incentivize people to figure out different tools and ways to do that, because recovery isn't a destination, it's a journey. So you're actively working on being there. So then I went to 4 undergrad colleges, but once I got into recovery, I finally finished it, and I got a psychology degree with an econ minor, and I fell in love with speaking. I have a theater background, but the more that I was volunteering and telling my story and really seeing it click with people, from crisis intervention trainings for police officers, I was doing churches, during COVID, it was just remote things. It was very powerful for me to share and feel seen, and also have other people relate and be like, I think I might be in mental health recovery. So that's what sprung me into just doing more and more of the advocacy and the disability stuff, because I wanted to do it more broadly and not just mental health, because I think that neurodevelopmental disorders, the ADHD and autism, mental health disorders, anxiety and depression, and physical health disorders, they're often separated into these little buckets, and I'm trying to interweave them. And then I went to law school and started getting really into accommodations and ADA stuff. And from there, I've just been advocating in whatever way I can for more inclusion and accessibility.
Well, ADA would be the Americans with Disabilities Act. And,
Thank you.
But you've been incredibly busy. I mean, you've been able to do all that and fit in law school. And so you are, you and I have talked, and you are in some ways doing what Ellie Krug did, which is, I just started speaking when I came out as transgender, and because in 2009 people are like, what's a transgender? Trans folks weren't very visible. And you are, you're setting out and starting to talk about this incredibly important topic about neural diversity and disability. And how are you finding the reception when you go out and you speak to various groups?
There's a lot of misconceptions out there about disability in general. I think the best way of explaining this is just a story, a very quick one, which is I was out at a bar hanging out with friends. I started a small talk with somebody, and it just came up that I'm disabled. I'm like, I'm disabled. And this person's immediate reaction was to say, you're not disabled, you're differently abled. And completely ignoring my identity and my preference and putting their own, because they have this bias towards disability being a bad word. And that's something that I see within the neurodiversity movement as trying to move away from and focus on the strengths. The one thing that I see again and again within the neurodiversity movement, which I love dearly, is that there's this overly simplistic view of like, we're looking at strengths only and not necessarily looking at how do we make sure we're accommodating the weaknesses, because it is a disability. But people are pretty receptive to learning about it, but they're just like, oh, I didn't really think about how often I'm saying crazy as like attacking someone and not really recognizing that the term crazy came from somewhere. Like I'm putting somebody else's experience down in order to call that driver something. And so those type of things, and I don't police like words like that. I think that it's important to use inclusive language, but it's also important to try to understand the actual meaning behind the words. There's a middle ground.
Sure. Okay. Well, and you're being very helpful right now for me, and I'm sure for my audience members. Tell us about, you've got this other initiative called Questify Your Life. And tell us what that is, if you would. What does it mean to questify?
So to questify your life is to use game mechanics, so gamification, which is using different video game and game mechanics in non-game situations to enhance basically player retention and comprehension and just usability. So a lot of companies use gamification. You see badges, you see like lists of who donated the most, you see levels. That's all gamification. But using that in a personal way to develop and choose what quests I want to do, that's the basis of it. And so I think of myself kind of like a video game character. And then I think of my life as a journey, and then I get to choose the quests I go on, and I get to like dress up and be whatever character is going to be the most effective for the quests of the season. And then from there, it's not as hard to get rejected if I'm actively going for something, because like in a video game, you're not going to make progress and hit those bigger goals or fight those big monsters without the chance of maybe not succeeding. So it helps just take the pressure off. And there's so much research about play and fun and humor and just like letting things like ease up a little bit, that it really incentivizes just a more positive attitude towards things, especially in the climate we're in. So it also helps with the fact that like, sometimes the world feels a little apocalyptic. And
sometimes
24 hours a day, but sometimes. And so in order to deal with that, I think of all of these systemic issues like ableism, transphobia, racism. I think of them as dragons. And these are systemic issues that are actively hurting people. But one individual cannot go after a dragon and make a huge difference. But if you actively take a look at these things and you protect the people who are getting harmed by the dragon, and then find groups of people coming together to try to like slay the dragon, we can make progress. We might not ever be able to fully like destroy some of these, but what we can do, and what I think we should do, is we can make systems where it doesn't hurt as many people. And so it's just an easier way, because if you look up in the sky and there's just a ton of dragons, you're not going to want to help. But if you choose one, and mine tends to be like the disability one, I'm focusing on mental health and disability.
That dragon, yep.
Yeah, my dragon. And then choose to fight that. Choose to learn as much about it and be a leader. And if other people need your help with the other dragons, then you follow and you lead and you support them. But the one you know, the one you care about, the one you put effort into, you be a leader there. You join others who are also leaders, and you make a difference.
Well, and when we talk, and when you use the word quest, it's kind of like journey. It's like mission, you know, that type of thing. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And so you have a website that says Questify Your Life, right? And then are you writing about your different parts of the journey?
Yes. So I have a Substack called Questify Your Life, and I'm also learning new skills and building skill trees. I use a lot of gamified language. But with that, I'm learning different things like YouTube and podcasts. And these are new skills that I don't necessarily have yet. But just like video game, you start at level 1 and you work your way up. And so I'm trying to build more community and resources, because this, for a very specific audience, tends to be neurodivergent nerds. Younger neurodivergent nerds is my audience for this. Being able to see somebody give themselves permission to cope with life in a quirky way, unapologetically, is really important. And I'm not saying that everyone should view life as a video game, because I take life very seriously. I think more that there's certain aspects of playing games, incentivizing yourself, rewarding yourself for your successes, being okay and learning from your failures, that people can take those things away from the process and just use it for themselves. And that's why I create content around it. And that's I try to meet people where they're at and then provide them tools so they can get where they want to go. And I think it also depends on your values. That's the first quest I recommend to anyone who decides they want to questify their life, is figure out what you value. Because if you don't know what you value, you go on a bunch of quests that profit others but do not profit yourself.
I love that. All right, so Sierra, I'm watching our time here. You know, this show is about idealism and people trying to make a difference in the world. So the question that almost every guest gets from me is, do you consider yourself an idealist? And if so, you know, why? How did you get that way? What made you that way? Was there a role model? Was there an experience?
I think it started when I started doing the public speaking to audiences that I didn't necessarily know wanted to even listen to my story. And from there, I could see people just leading with curiosity in really hard topics. And I genuinely believe that most people are good. Most people want to understand. And we just live in a world that we're so based on fear. And so I believe that we can make a better world. And that's it. And it's also a little bit of survivor's guilt, to be honest. Like, I lived my life so long not being able to get out of survival mode. And now I've been able to build a community and build a life that I love. And I don't necessarily believe, like, if I can do it, you can do it type of thing, but more so that we need to give more and more people the resources to get out of survival and allow them to build a thriving life, and so that they can define it. And I think that most people can if we support them.
Well, that's wonderful. I mean, I love it. I mean, survival mode is really a really great phrase, because I think that you're right. There are a lot of people right now totally in survival mode. A part of that survival is fearing, you know, what is around the corner. You know, certainly for transgender people like me, the question is, what kind of America will I be experiencing a year from now if things go awry? But I know that across the country right now, a lot of people are just hunkering down, waiting until the results of November 5th, you know, to try and make some decision about, you know, how their life is going to turn out to be.
And with that, for some people, that might be their first dragon. Like, that might be the thing that they're like, you know what? I want to actively make a difference. Why don't I get more involved? Why don't I learn more about my candidates? Why don't I maybe volunteer? And why don't I make sure I'm voting and the people around me are voting? Because your vote matters. Every little thing you do, it does matter. And that's where I'm an idealist.
Yeah.
I believe that those little things compounded and incentivized make such a difference.
Yeah. Yep. Nope. One of my heroes, Robert F. Kennedy, talked about ripples of hope, and so that combined to create a river that, can change the course of everything. Well,
I agree with that.
Sierra Grande, it's been a pleasure to have you on Ellie 2.0 Radio. Thanks so much for giving us of your time and for your vulnerability here. I'm just very, very grateful. And thank you for what you're doing out in the world. Okay?
Thank you.
I think it's incredibly important, and I look forward to following you and, to staying in touch and seeing all the great things you're going to accomplish.
Well, if anybody in the audience would like public speaking, consulting, more knowledge about neurodiversity and disability, you can go to my website at sierragrande.com or email me at sierra@questifyyourlife.com or LinkedIn, my name. Just connect with me. These conversations are important, and I love having them.
Well, I'm glad that you gave the plug. I'm sorry I forgot about asking for that, but yes, by all means. Yes, audience members, if you want to know more about Sierra Grande's work, just go to sierragrande.com and you can learn more about her. Okay?
Yes.
All right, Sierra, take care. Thanks so very much.
Thank you.
Okay, have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.
You as well.
Okay,
Bye.
Bye-bye. Oh, audience members, we'll be back in a moment. Just got sidetracked by looking at Brett. Okay, we'll be back in a moment. You're listening to me, Ellie Krug, on Ellie 2.0 Radio. Thanks.
How long till my soul gets it right? Did any human being ever reach that kind of light? I call on the resting soul of Galileo, king of night.
And we're back. Ellie 2.0 Radio. Sierra Grande, lovely, lovely person, doing incredible work, going out there talking about topics, neurodiversity, the number of 1 in 5, the number of people who are on the autism spectrum, it just blows me away, the number of people. And every one of those folks counts. They all matter. Just want you to know that. Okay? If you're ADHD, you're neurodiverse. Just telling you. Okay. All right. C Block, my work. I've got 5 minutes to tell you about my work as an idealist. So listen, over Labor Day weekend, you may have, I think I talked about it, perhaps I didn't. I went down to Lanesboro, which is in southeastern Minnesota, and rode my bike for 2 days. Lanesboro is a small, wonderful town in the middle of the hills, because down in southeastern Minnesota, it does not look like Minnesota. It does not look like the Midwest. It looks like New England because of all the hills and the forests and all that stuff. So that was 2 weeks ago. And on Thursday of this week, I went back to southeast Minnesota. I went to a town named Caledonia, not New Caledonia, Caledonia. And I trained an agency all day. I did gray area thinking in the morning, and then this is an agency that does a number of social social service kind of agency things with social workers and people helping people who are on the margins, who literally might not have anybody else but one of these agencies folks as their advocates. I train them on Transgender 101, how to be welcoming to trans people. Now, it was, as I said, gray area thinking in the morning, Trans 101 in the afternoon. And when I do Trans 101, usually what I do is I start out by doing a poll. And so when I was in Caledonia, in the morning, before anybody got to know me with gray area thinking, I just said, look, you're going to hear from me in the afternoon about transgender stuff, But right now, before you hear anything about me, before we do any other work around gray area thinking, I want to do a poll. And the poll is, and they had little note cards to write on, index cards cut in half. They had 2 of them. And on one of those cards, in the morning, I said, here's the poll. And just write down the answer. The question is, do you believe being transgender is a choice? Yes, no, or uncertain? Okay? We had about 35 or so people in the audience. And I will tell you, I was a little disappointed by the results, because in the morning when I asked that question, do you believe being trans is a choice? Yes, no, or uncertain? 4 people said yes, it was a choice. Another 14 people said they were uncertain about it. And 12 people said no, it wasn't a choice. So in other words, more people were either, yeah, it's a choice, or I don't know if it's a choice, versus those who understood it's not a choice. And so when I saw that, those poll results, I thought, Ellie, you need to be here. This is why you are here. This is important that you're here. This is the kind of work that you need to be doing. And so I did gray area thinking. They were very great. They participated in it, and I think that they got something out of it. They had lunch, and then we came back and we did Transgender 101. And I talked a lot about, understanding what it means to be trans, that it's there's a lot of fear around it, a lot of stuff. And that mainly that it's not a choice. And I have a tool set that I use to teach people that it's not a choice. And we got done, with Trans 101. And I said, hold on. There's one more sheet of paper, little piece of paper you have on your desk. Here's the question again. Do you believe being transgender is a choice? So they've had me now at this point for 4 hours, 2 different workshops. So do you believe being trans is a choice? Yes, no, or uncertain? You know what? By the end of all that, you know what the results were? Do you believe trans is a choice? 0 said yes. Only 4 people said they believe that they were uncertain about it. And I had 26 people who said, nah, it's not a choice. It's real. I got to tell you, Ellie Krug, the idealist, made me smile. And it made me think, I got to do more and more of this work in more and more towns like this. I do. Of course, as you've heard me, whine, the work is drying up because people are afraid to bring Ellie Krug in. They're afraid. They're afraid of being criticized. So, at any rate, it was good to see the results. Okay. That's the end of the show. I mean, I got to thank my producer, Brett Johnson, who is just like the best in the whole wide business. I want to thank you, okay? I don't hear from you enough. So if you want, email me, ellejkrug@gmail.com. Tell me whether you like this show or not. Tell me if I'm helping. Suggest something to me. If you have a guest that you think I might like, an idealist that let me know about that person. I'll check them out, okay? But between now and when you hear my voice next, all right, will you do me this favor? You know what I'm going to say if you've been listening to me for other shows. Between now and when you hear my voice next, will you go out and do something, small or big, to make the world better? Will you do that? Thanks a lot. I appreciate that. Okay. Ellie Krug, over and out.